Derek Brennan had spent 35 years settling one simple question: where one person's land stopped and someone else's began. After decades as a professional land surveyor, he thought retirement beside a quiet lake would finally give him the peace he'd earned. Instead, it placed him directly in the path of the most determined HOA president he'd ever met. She challenged his ownership 3 separate times. First, she tried sending an attorney with a legal threat. When that failed, she convinced the county to issue him a violation notice. And when neither worked, she hired an $85,000 excavator to begin building a dock on land she didn't own. That decision ended everything. By the time the construction crew arrived, Derek wasn't surprised anymore. He had already spent months collecting emails, preserving documents, recording trespassing incidents, and preparing for the moment someone crossed the final line. Every conversation had been saved. Every claim had been documented. Every visit onto his property had been captured on camera. Standing beside the gravel access road he had personally surveyed decades earlier, Derek watched the excavator stop before reaching the lake. He handed the operator a court order, who read every page carefully before glancing at the heavy chains stretched across the entrance. Without saying much, the operator climbed back inside the machine, shifted into reverse, and slowly backed away. Farther up the hill, Brenda Kessler stood watching, furious. Months earlier, everything had started much differently. In April 2024, about 5 months after moving permanently into his lakeside cabin, Derek heard a knock at his front door. Standing outside was Brenda Kessler, carrying a homemade casserole covered with aluminum foil and wearing a warm smile that seemed carefully practiced. The visit felt friendly enough. They sat together on the porch overlooking the calm water while Brenda talked about the community, the neighborhood traditions, and how everyone looked after one another. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward the lake. She explained that previous owners had always allowed neighborhood families to reach the shoreline through Derek's property. Then she smiled again. "I'm sure you'll want to continue that tradition." At the time, Derek wasn't interested in conflict. He had purchased the land back in 1998, long before the surrounding neighborhood even existed. What had once been empty woodland eventually became a gated subdivision after developers purchased nearby acreage and divided it into hundreds of residential lots. But views weren't the same as ownership. Only Derek's property reached the lake. Only his deed included the access road leading downhill. He had built that road himself in 1999, paying for every truckload of gravel, planning proper drainage, and surveying every foot with professional precision. He certainly wasn't looking for disputes with an HOA. So when Brenda asked whether neighborhood families could occasionally use the beach, Derek agreed, with conditions. No large gatherings. Keep the area clean. Brenda thanked him repeatedly, saying everyone would appreciate his generosity. What Derek didn't realize then was that Brenda wasn't asking permission. She believed the beach already belonged to the community. Brenda wasn't simply HOA president. She also worked as one of the area's busiest real estate agents. Over the years, she had sold dozens of homes inside Clearwater Ridge, and many buyers believed those homes included community lake access. Derek wouldn't discover that until much later. For several months, everything stayed peaceful. Families visited during weekends, children swam near the shore, kayaks drifted across the water, and everyone left before evening. Derek waved from his porch, neighbors waved back, and life remained quiet. Then everything changed. One afternoon in December 2024, Derek stopped by the community clubhouse to pay his HOA dues. Inside the lobby, large architectural drawings were displayed prominently. Across the bottom of the presentation was a title that immediately caught Derek's attention: Clearwater Ridge Community Beach Project. Estimated cost, $85,000. His eyes stayed fixed on the illustration. The entire project had been drawn directly onto his private shoreline. He returned home immediately, retrieved his original property survey, and carefully traced every boundary line. There was no misunderstanding, no overlap, no missing easement. The planned construction sat entirely on land that legally belonged to him. The following morning made things even worse. A laminated construction notice had been staked into the sand announcing that work would begin on January 15, 2025. According to the notice, the project had already received board approval and would be funded through a special assessment paid by homeowners. Derek pulled out his phone and called Brenda. She answered cheerfully. He asked one simple question. Did anyone from the HOA ask my permission before approving construction on my property? After a brief silence, Brenda laughed. She insisted they didn't need permission because the beach was community property. Another silence followed. Finally, she admitted she wasn't aware of any easement. Derek's response was straightforward. Without a recorded legal agreement, the HOA had no right to enter his property, much less build a permanent structure on it. Brenda's friendly tone disappeared instantly. She informed him the project would continue anyway because it served the community's best interests. Then she ended the call. That evening Derek spread every property record across his dining room table. The original deed, property tax statements, county records, anything connected to the land. Then he downloaded the Clearwater Ridge HOA covenants and read them page by page. There wasn't a single recorded easement giving the Homeowners Association access to his shoreline. No legal description. No surveyed boundaries. No signed agreement. Nothing that transferred even a small portion of his property to the community. Legally, it meant almost nothing. As Derek continued reading, another realization settled in. If Brenda had spent years selling homes while advertising community lake access, buyers may have been promised something the HOA never actually owned. That wasn't Derek's problem to solve. His only concern was protecting his property. He picked up his phone and called Ramona Vasquez, a longtime real estate attorney and an old family friend. Ramona had handled complicated property disputes for decades. After listening carefully to Derek explain everything from Brenda's visit to the construction plans, she paused for several seconds. Finally, she spoke. You have a very strong case. Those words brought some relief, but her next sentence was less comforting. Don't expect this to stay simple. She explained that homeowners associations often fought aggressively once legal action started. They usually had attorneys ready, operating budgets to fund lawsuits, and boards unwilling to admit mistakes. Winning wasn't always enough. Sometimes the process itself became the punishment. Derek asked what he should expect. Ramona didn't sugarcoat it. Possible fines. Endless complaints. Pressure designed to wear him down until he simply gave up. Derek walked onto his porch and stared across the calm water. He had owned this property for 27 years. Ramona told him exactly where to begin. Document absolutely everything. Every phone call. Every email. Every person entering the property. Every threat. Every interaction. Photos. Videos. Timestamps. The stronger the evidence became, the less room anyone would have to argue later. Derek thanked her and immediately started preparing. Within days, he ordered a high-quality trail camera normally used by hunters. The camera included motion detection, infrared night vision, and automatic date and timestamps. He mounted it on a large tree overlooking the gravel road leading to the beach. Anyone using that entrance would now be recorded. Next, he installed bright orange property markers every 20 feet along the legal boundary. There would be no confusion about where private property began. Anyone crossing those markers would be doing so knowingly. On December 18th, Derek composed an email addressed to every member of the HOA board. The subject was direct. Community Beach Project. His message was equally clear. He formally stated that he did not authorize construction anywhere on his property. He explained that the beach remained privately owned and attached copies of his recorded survey, deed, and tax records confirming continuous ownership since 1998. He warned that any entry without written permission would constitute trespassing under applicable state law. Finally, he demanded that all construction plans involving his land be stopped immediately. Before sending it, Derek carefully reviewed every sentence. No emotion, no insults, just facts. He mailed physical copies as certified letters as well, ensuring there would be proof they had received them. Less than an hour later, Brenda replied, She accused Derek of being selfish. She wrote that hundreds of neighborhood families relied on the lake and claimed residents had enjoyed access for nearly 20 years. She also admitted something important. The HOA had already awarded the construction contract. Homeowners had already paid the special assessment. Construction would proceed on January 15th as scheduled. If Derek disagreed, she suggested attending the next board meeting. One word stayed with him after reading the email: selfish. He had purchased the land before there was a subdivision. He paid every tax bill. He built the access road himself. He maintained the shoreline. Now he was supposedly selfish because he refused to let someone build an expensive dock without even asking permission. Instead of replying, Derek forwarded Brenda's email to Ramona. Her phone call came almost immediately. Brenda had unknowingly provided valuable evidence. By stating in writing that construction would continue despite Derek's objection, the HOA demonstrated it understood his position and intended to move forward anyway. That distinction mattered legally. Ramona recommended filing for a temporary restraining order before construction began. If granted, the order could stop the project before equipment ever reached the property. Keep documenting everything. The trail camera became surprisingly busy. Its first recordings began only 2 days later. Parents carrying beach chairs. Children running toward the shoreline. Couples enjoying quiet afternoons near the dock. Most of those people probably believed they had every right to be there. Derek never confronted them. He simply saved every video. Every incident went into a spreadsheet listing the date, exact time, description, and corresponding evidence file. Nothing was left to memory. Everything was organized. On December 27th, Derek met his neighbor Pete near the community mailbox. He had heard about the dock dispute. After a moment of hesitation, Pete revealed something interesting. According to him, Brenda had rushed the construction contract through unusually fast. The board hadn't gathered competing bids. Instead, she recommended a contractor connected to someone she knew personally. He wasn't certain, but he remembered hearing the name during a board discussion. Derek thanked him for the information. Apparently, Brenda had a reputation for making life difficult for anyone who questioned her decisions. He mentioned the possible connection between the contractor and Brenda's personal contacts. Ramona acknowledged it could eventually become important if conflicts of interest emerged. For now, however, she advised staying focused. Winning that battle came first. Then she warned Derek about another argument the HOA might eventually raise. They could attempt to claim a prescriptive easement. Derek asked how long that typically required. Ramona explained the state's requirements: open, continuous, and adverse use extending for roughly 20 years. Then she smiled slightly. Fortunately for Derek, one critical element was missing. He had repeatedly allowed neighbors onto the property by permission. That difference could completely undermine such a claim. 19 recorded entries had accumulated in only 1 week. By mid-January, the evidence file would be enormous. If anyone wanted to argue the facts later, every answer would already be waiting. Derek woke before sunrise, brewed a cup of coffee, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. Everything around the lake felt unusually still, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The heavy steel chain was already sitting in the back of his truck. He carried it to the entrance of the gravel access road and stretched it across the opening, securing it between 2 sturdy posts with a commercial-grade padlock. It wasn't there to provoke anyone. It was there to make one thing unmistakably clear. No one had permission to enter. At 6:45 that morning, Derek made one final phone call. Deputy Frank Hollister answered after a couple of rings. The two men knew each other casually from years of running into one another around town, usually while shopping at the hardware store or talking about fishing. Frank had a reputation for handling situations calmly and for actually taking the time to understand the law before making decisions. A construction crew was expected to arrive. He owned the property. He had already obtained a temporary restraining order, and he believed the crew had been instructed to begin work anyway. Frank didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." A large yellow excavator rounded the bend first, its steel tracks rattling over the pavement. Behind it came a pickup truck with the contractor's company logo displayed across both doors. Two workers climbed out while the excavator operator remained inside for a moment, checking paperwork before easing the machine toward the entrance. Then he noticed the chain, the bright orange property markers, and Derek standing beside them. The excavator stopped. The operator climbed down, lit a cigarette, and looked from the paperwork in his hand to the shoreline beyond the trees. Derek walked over calmly. "Morning." The operator nodded politely. "We're supposed to start building a dock down by the lake." Derek asked a simple question. The man frowned. "The HOA hired us. I am the property owner." For a second, nobody spoke. The operator's expression changed immediately. Derek reached into a folder and handed him several documents. A copy of the temporary restraining order. Proof of ownership. The operator carefully read each page. Halfway through, he looked back toward the pickup truck where the rest of the crew was waiting. By then, Deputy Hollister's patrol vehicle had arrived. Frank parked nearby, greeted Derek, and asked the operator whether he had reviewed the paperwork. Frank examined the court order himself before turning toward the construction supervisor who had just stepped out of the pickup. The deputy explained the situation in straightforward terms. The property belonged to Derek. A court order prohibited construction. Ignoring it could expose everyone involved to serious legal consequences. The supervisor didn't argue. Judging by the conversation, Derek guessed he was speaking with someone from the HOA. The call became louder with every passing second. Eventually, the supervisor lowered the phone and sighed. "They're telling us to keep working." Frank answered before anyone else could. He paused. "But if you proceed beyond this point after being informed of the court order, you'll be accepting responsibility for your own decisions." The supervisor looked at the excavator operator. Neither man seemed eager to test the deputy's warning. After another brief discussion between themselves, the operator climbed back into the excavator. The diesel engine roared once more. Instead of driving forward, however, the machine slowly backed away from the entrance. The pickup followed. Only then did another SUV pull into view. Brenda climbed out before the engine had even stopped. Her face showed a mixture of disbelief and anger. She marched directly toward Derek. "You can't stop this project." Derek remained calm. "I already have." She insisted the HOA had invested thousands of dollars. Contracts had been signed. Derek simply pointed toward the departing construction equipment. "They're leaving." Brenda turned toward Deputy Hollister. She argued that the beach belonged to the community and accused Derek of interfering with approved improvements. Frank listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked a single question. "Do you have a recorded easement granting access to this property?" Brenda hesitated. She never answered. Frank nodded. "Then this remains private property." The conversation ended there. Brenda eventually returned to her vehicle without another word. Later that afternoon, Ramona called with more news. The judge had officially scheduled the hearing regarding the restraining order and any future construction attempts. Now that the court was involved, every piece of evidence Derek had collected would become important. Emails, photographs, videos, property records, trail camera footage, certified letters, everything. Over the next several weeks, both sides exchanged documents through their attorneys. The HOA maintained that residents had always believed the shoreline belonged to the community. Derek's legal team responded with deeds, surveys, county records, and decades of tax payments proving uninterrupted ownership. Belief, Ramona reminded everyone, wasn't the same as legal title. The documents spoke for themselves. As discovery continued, additional information began surfacing. Some simply assumed it was true because everyone else believed it. The misunderstanding had spread for years without anyone questioning it. Now those assumptions were being examined under oath. One by one, the facts became harder to dispute. As the court process moved forward, Derek stayed patient. Every email from the HOA was saved. Every certified letter was filed. Every trail camera recording was backed up in multiple locations. The evidence folder kept growing. Derek had all three. A few weeks before the hearing, another unexpected development surfaced. One of the homeowners contacted Derek privately. She explained that after hearing about the dispute, she had searched through the closing documents from when she purchased her home. She couldn't find a single document granting lake access. Curious, she contacted her title company. Their response surprised her. According to the title records, her property never included waterfront rights. The only references to lake access appeared in old promotional brochures and marketing material, not in legally recorded documents. As word spread, several other homeowners started reviewing their paperwork. Many reached the same conclusion. Some felt confused. Most had honestly believed the neighborhood owned a shared beach because that was what they had been told for years. Questions inside the community quickly shifted. Instead of asking why Derek refused to share his land, people began asking how the misunderstanding had lasted so long. Several board members also became uneasy. Until then, they had relied heavily on Brenda's assurances that everything had been researched before approving the dock project. Now they weren't so sure. One director requested copies of the easement during a board meeting. None could be produced. Again, there wasn't a clear answer. The atmosphere within the HOA changed noticeably. Board members who had previously supported the project without hesitation suddenly wanted more information before making additional decisions. Brenda insisted everything would work out once the judge heard the case. But her confidence no longer seemed to reassure everyone else. Meanwhile, Ramona prepared Derek for the upcoming hearing. She organized every document into chronological order. The original purchase records from 1998, the professionally prepared survey, annual tax records, the certified letters sent to the HOA, Brenda's emails acknowledging that construction would continue despite Derek's objections. Everything fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Nothing contradicted anything else. When hearing day finally arrived, Derek entered the courtroom carrying several organized binders. Across the room sat Brenda, the HOA attorney, and representatives from the association. The judge began by reviewing the request to continue the restraining order while determining the underlying property dispute. Ramona presented Derek's ownership records first. She carefully walked through each document, showing an uninterrupted chain of title stretching back decades. Tax records confirmed continuous ownership and responsibility for the land. Then she introduced Brenda's emails. Those messages showed the HOA had been informed, in writing, that Derek did not consent to construction. Despite that warning, the association announced plans to proceed anyway. Finally, Ramona presented selected trail camera footage. The videos weren't introduced to criticize neighbors. Instead, they demonstrated that people had entered the property believing they had permission, even though no legal easement existed. Residents had visited the beach for years. Families considered it part of neighborhood life. The dock project, they argued, simply formalized an arrangement everyone had accepted. The judge listened carefully before asking an important question. Can you identify the recorded document granting your client access rights to this property? The courtroom grew quiet. That answer carried significant weight. The judge then reviewed Derek's documentation once more. Nothing suggested ownership had ever transferred. Allowing occasional guests onto private land did not automatically create permanent public access. Permission remained permission. Ownership remained ownership. Construction would not proceed. No equipment could enter the property. No dock could be built. The decision wasn't the final resolution of every issue, but it represented a major victory. Outside the courthouse, several homeowners approached Derek. Some apologized for assuming the beach belonged to everyone. Others admitted they had never questioned what they had been told when purchasing their homes. Most had relied on information they believed was accurate. His disagreement had never been with families enjoying the lake. It had always been about protecting property rights and preventing unauthorized construction. As people slowly left the courthouse, Brenda walked to her vehicle without speaking. The confidence she had displayed months earlier had disappeared. The legal process, however, was still unfolding. More evidence remained to be reviewed. More decisions still had to be made. But for the first time since the conflict began, Derek felt certain that the facts were leading everyone toward the same conclusion. For the first time, the HOA wasn't controlling the conversation. The documents were. Every meeting, every email, and every decision made by the board was now being examined alongside the official property records. What had once sounded like a simple neighborhood disagreement had become a straightforward question of legal ownership. Ramona encouraged him to stay patient. She reminded him that strong cases often moved slowly because every claim had to be verified, every filing reviewed, and every argument answered properly. Rushing the process only created opportunities for mistakes. Derek understood. After spending decades surveying property lines, he knew precision always mattered more than speed. Not long afterward, another important development surfaced. They wanted to know exactly how the board had approved spending $85,000 on a structure plan for land the association didn't own. Meeting minutes were reviewed. Financial records were examined. Some homeowners wondered why competitive bids hadn't been obtained. Others wanted to know whether the board had ever received a written legal opinion confirming that construction could legally proceed. The answers weren't satisfying. The deeper people looked, the more they realized important assumptions had never been verified. Instead, decisions had been made based largely on long-standing beliefs rather than recorded facts. Most of them had no desire to become involved in a lawsuit. They simply expected their HOA to confirm ownership before approving major construction projects. Some admitted they had relied on information presented during meetings without independently reviewing the supporting documents. Others acknowledged they had assumed someone else had already confirmed the legal details. Responsibility, it seemed, had been passed from one person to another until nobody could clearly explain how the project reached final approval. Meanwhile, Derek continued living much as he always had. He spent quiet mornings on his porch watching the lake. He maintained his gravel road. Occasionally neighbors waved while walking nearby. Some even stopped to apologize personally. Derek accepted those conversations politely. He understood most residents had acted in good faith. Many simply trusted information that turned out to be inaccurate. Eventually, mediation discussions were proposed. Rather than continue escalating legal costs, attorneys from both sides explored whether the dispute could be resolved without a lengthy trial. Ramona advised Derek to listen carefully but never compromise ownership. She explained there was a difference between being cooperative and giving away legal rights. Derek agreed. He remained willing to discuss reasonable arrangements in the future, provided they respected the boundaries established by law. Ownership itself, however, was never negotiable. During one mediation session, representatives from the HOA suggested creating a permanent public access agreement. In exchange, they offered to maintain the shoreline and assume certain maintenance expenses. Derek declined. His decision wasn't based on money. He had spent years caring for the property exactly as he wanted. He wasn't interested in replacing one disagreement with another that might continue indefinitely. Instead, he proposed something much simpler. If community groups wished to request occasional access for specific events, they could contact him directly. Each request would be considered individually. Nothing would become permanent. Nothing would transfer ownership. Permission would remain exactly what it had always been, a choice made by the property owner. The proposal reflected the same approach Derek had taken from the very beginning. Reasonable requests could be discussed. Unauthorized construction could not. As negotiations continued, the HOA quietly abandoned plans for the dock project altogether. The construction contract was canceled. No equipment returned to Derek's property. The bright orange survey markers remained exactly where he had placed them. The heavy chain eventually came down as well. It had served its purpose. Months after the dispute began, Clearwater Ridge held elections for several board positions. A number of homeowners voted for new leadership. The incoming board promised greater transparency, independent legal review for future projects, and closer attention to recorded property documents before approving major expenditures. Those changes didn't erase everything that had happened, but they represented an effort to prevent similar disputes from developing again. One afternoon, Derek received a letter from the new board president. The message acknowledged the outcome of the legal proceedings and confirmed that the association recognized Derek's exclusive ownership of the shoreline and access road. It also stated that any future requests involving the property would require his written approval beforehand. Ramona smiled after reading the letter. This is exactly what we wanted. Not revenge. Not headlines. Just clear recognition of established property rights. Looking back, Derek realized the conflict had never truly been about a dock. Too many people accepted something as true simply because it had been repeated for years. Very few had stopped to ask whether the records actually supported the belief. Fortunately, property ownership isn't determined by rumor. It's determined by deeds, surveys, and properly recorded documents. Those records had protected Derek from the very beginning. As spring returned to the lake, the shoreline looked exactly as it always had. No pavilion. No oversized dock extending into the water. Only quiet mornings, gentle waves, and the peaceful retirement Derek had hoped to enjoy when he first built the cabin. Every now and then he would walk the property line, more out of habit than necessity. After decades as a surveyor, old routines were hard to break. Standing near the same boundary markers he had installed months earlier, he reflected on everything the experience had taught him. Knowing your rights matters. Documenting facts matters even more. And sometimes the strongest response isn't raising your voice.